Glad to be here.
What incentives look like when we are able to pull it all together.
There's that right on.
And then the painting and the, hey, like, we're moving in the right direction. Got some fresh flowers up there.
Is that a heater?
That already? Yeah.
All right. I'll ask Mr. Baker to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May we have a moment of silence, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to remind all the board members we'll be streaming live, so please speak into the microphones. And I would also like to recognize our new City Council liaison, Mr. Bill Gulford. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, first up today will be the approval of minutes from the June 4th board meeting. You should all receive copies in your board packets. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Are there any public comments at this time? No public comments. Thank you. Okay, I'd like Lisa Diaz to come up and talk about the foreign trade zone area for Flagler County. Which is BD 218-8-1.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I am Lisa Diaz, manager of FTZ 64 with JAXPORT. This morning I'm going to speak to you about BD 0801. The Jacksonville Port Authority is the grantee for Foreign Trade Zone number 64 of Northeast Florida. As grantee, JAXPORT both manages and administers all zone activities, including service area expansions. The current zone area includes all counties which are part of the JAX-USA partnership with the exception of Flagler County. In 2010, JAXPORT reorganized the FTZ, expanding the zone area to comprise all JAX-USA partnership counties. Flagler County subsequently joined JAX-USA partnership 2 years later in 2012, and therefore was not included in the original reorganization of the zone area. However, once they are added to the zone, all Northeast Florida counties within JAX-USA partnership will be included under FTZ number 64. In February 2018, the officials of Flagler County approached JAXPORT regarding being added to FTZ 64. Doing so would be mutually beneficial to both parties by allowing Flagler County to market FTZ benefits and by allowing JAXPORT to include Flagler County for imported FTZ cargo. It will also expand our FTZ service area by another 571 square miles. Now, in order to do this, as defined in 15 CFR Part 400 of the Code of Federal Regulations, JAXPORT must approve a board resolution authorizing the filing of an alternative site framework expansion application, which is why I am in front of you today. Once passed, this resolution also authorizes any subsequent administrative actions, such as the addition of new FTZ site applications, to be filed at the FTZ Zones Office. This will provide JAXPORT with the ability to quickly react to a request under the ASF, the Alternative Site Framework. The current status of the application is this. The application to include Flagler County under Zone Number 64 is ready for submission to the Foreign Trade Zones Board, pending the approval of this board resolution. All other requirements as outlined in 15 CFR Part 400 have been met. It is at this time that I respectfully recommend the board adopt such resolution for the purpose of adding Flagler County to the zone area of FTZ number 64 and to approve any subsequent administrative actions relating to this application be filed at the Foreign Trade Zones Board. That completes my resolution. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Lisa, does this now that we have Flagler, are there any other counties that we're targeting, or is that pretty much wrap it up?
This will wrap it up.
That's everybody in our geographical jurisdiction?
Correct. It's everyone involved with JAX USA and everyone within the jurisdiction as defined by the CFR. Correct. Other questions?
All right, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any other discussions? Questions? No?
Questions?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Beth to come up and present BD 218-8-2 Harbor Deepening Project B Phase 1 Environmental Monitoring.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I present a board submission today, the purpose of which is to provide JAXPORT funding for the Harbor Deepening Project. And I would remind you that in January 30th, 2017, the board approved the project partnership agreement with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the entire project. The project was split into 3 phases: Contract A, which is currently underway, Contract B, Contract C, together with environmental monitoring of the construction. Contract A was awarded in June of 2017. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is now ready to prepare to award Contract B, Phase 1, for the project's continued construction. The project has been allocated $32.4 million in this fiscal year from the federal government. The Florida Department of Transportation will also be making a grant of $15.5 million. And JAXPORT's, that funding will be available after August 15th. And based on the identified sources of funding from both the federal government and the city government, the state government, JAXPORT anticipates needing to fund up to $60 million for its share of Contract B Phase 1. And that includes associated monitoring. So it is our recommendation that the board authorize the remittance of up to $60 million to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to fund the participation agreement for JAXPORT's share of Contract B Phase 1, construction cost, and environmental monitoring.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
We have a bid? Yeah?
Yes.
The bids have been opened by the Army Corps of Engineers. They have not been made public. The bid is expected to be awarded after the Army does its work on qualifications and review of the bids, and the award would be made on August 24th.
They also have to have the funding in place, right, before they can award it?
They have to have
So
the
we have-
funding in their bank account.
The money has to be transferred?
That's exactly right.
Okay. All in favor? Say
Aye.
So moved. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. James is going to come up and talk about our favorite subject, maintenance dredging.
It is a subject, I don't know about favorite, but it's certainly a subject to talk about.
Why don't you, James, just take a minute and so that everybody out there understands what maintenance dredging is
Maintenance
and what it entails.
I think I will. I think I've covered a lot of that in the presentation, but I will just to give a little bit of background information on it. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for dredging the main channel itself, the Federal Navigation Channel itself. However, from that navigational channel up to our berths, the JAXPORT must maintain and dredge those berths to ensure that we have the depths so when a vessel is brought in to the main channel, it can then be traversed from the main channel up to our berths. The main channel here for the Jacksonville Harbor is 40 foot deep at the moment. And so this maintenance dredging is just that, is our berth maintenance dredging, which maintains the ability to move vessels from the main channel up to our berths, both at Talleyrand, Dames Point, and Blunt Island. So again, it's maintenance so that we can continue operations as a port and bring vessels in. Obviously, vessels, different ones coming at different drafts, but our overall depth is 40 foot that we try to maintain. What I wanted to do today is actually give you some information, and I'm going to ask for action before it's over as well. But I thought it would be important for you to understand where we're at, what kind of, so a little bit of history both on the contract that we currently have, as well as some history on what we're experiencing with dredging. The current contract we have in place went out for advertisement for the annual maintenance dredge services in April of 2016. And we did receive one conforming bid. We went through the process and vetted that, as well as negotiated rates, which we believe was very favorable for JAXPORT as well. That was, we went under contract in October 1st of 2016. The contract had for a base 3-year period, so we are currently in the end of the second year of the base 3 years. It also allows for up to 3 one-year renewal periods as well. So this contract could technically have been in place for a total of 6 years, but we're only in the second year of the base contract now. One of the key items in the contract was the terms which we negotiated, which was a unit rate for the cubic yardage of siltation of the material that's been removed. That's negotiated for each one of our terminals because it's a little bit different, because different routes in order to dispose of the material. But we also include a little bit for inflation for each one of the 3 base years. We would do the same thing in negotiating for any additional, any of the additions for the 1-year renewals. But again, it's base year with small increase for inflation for each of the 2 remaining years of the base year. What we found this year, though, is we've experienced extremely high volumes. And I want to talk a little bit about where we're at and where the volumes come from. Over the last 6 years, before this previous year, we've averaged, if you average the 6 years, about 156,000 yards of dredging on the average. Some years are a little higher, some are lower. We don't always get to control Mother Nature and how much siltation, but on the average, we looked at about 156,000 yards for the average 6-year period. This year, we're way over that, all right? Not only JAXPORT, but also the Army Corps of Engineers is well over it, as well as our private terminals. So it's not something that is just isolated to us. It's isolated. It's everyone along the river. We've experienced considerable higher rates in maintenance dredging. Some of the contributing causes, just at the beginning of last fiscal year, we had Hurricane Matthew come through, but more so, as previous year, but then the beginning of last year, we also had right behind it Hurricane Irma, and it had a tremendous amount of increase in rainfall events, high storm surges. If you recall, a lot of downtown, the core of downtown was very high and underwater. Okay, created a lot of flushing of materials out into the tributaries, into the creeks, and on out into the river. But it's not just that. This year we've had higher rainfall than average as well. Earlier in the year, we did have some drought, but last week at the regional council meeting, the Water Management District announced that so far this year, we're over 13 inches higher in rainfall this year than we were last year. So that continues to flush the systems out, coming out into the river as well. So we've had an unusual year. The graphic I have here just gives you a graphical representation of the volumes that we've experienced. It's got 6 years of history at each one of our terminals, plus the current year. And I've broken it down by terminals, and what you can really see is the blue one is Talleyrand. Talleyrand is the terminal that we have the most dredging that's required here, so forth. If you look at each one of the remaining terminals, again, they're much lower in volumes, but if you look at the current year, the overall current year, every one is higher than it was in previous years for the last 6 years. Also, we had to do the turning basin at Dames Point this time around as well. We had to do it. It hit us at the very beginning of this fiscal year, so we've had to do that, and it was an unusually high volume at that one as well. That's why the last column here you see is much higher, because the turning basin come into play that year. If I summarize these and look at totals, you can see previous years, those first 6 years averaged about 156,000 if I average those numbers. Currently this year, I'm looking at hitting over 400,000 yards in dredge maintenance. This is simply to maintain the 40-foot channel, 40-foot depth from the main channel up to our berths. So again, very high. So I look further back at history. What in the world do we see long-term? What has created this? And this is a 22-year history since 1995. And 2 years stand out, 2006 and current year with volumes in excess of 400,000. So what happened in those 2 years? Well, we had a little hurricane called Francis in that year, and we've had Hurricane Irma this time around, all right? So why are those two such particular? Look at where they went. Hurricane Francis went across the central part of the state and went north just up along Route Tallahassee. But an important thing to note with that one is by the time it come across by Tallahassee, just west of us, it was already a tropical storm. If you look at Hurricane Irma, it followed a very similar path, run up the state, again creating a lot of siltation. The headwaters for the St. Johns River is in central Florida, right? So it created a lot of rainfall, a lot of flushing of the river, and it come in just west of us, and it was still a hurricane when it passed us as well. So two events over the last 2 years really showed themselves that really created a challenge for us this year, and we're not out of the woods yet. We continue to have a considerable amount of siltation here in the river. What we're trying to do, though, is look a little bit more and be a little bit more proactive with what's happening. What are we doing to try to help minimize our cost? How can we continue to maintain our dredging without going over what we're projecting? And while I cannot project what Mother Nature is going to do, we can continue to work to make certain that we're doing steps, everything we can, to minimize what it's costing us. We're taking a more systematic approach. That meaning, as I come to a terminal, say Dames Point, we're going to try to clear all the berths we can at Dames Point. Same thing at Talleyrand, and the same thing at Blunt Island. When we come, we're going to try to move all across all berths at one time. Therefore, we save on mobilization and demobilization charges. That's not always easily said and done because we are a very active port. We have vessels coming in and out constantly, and we cannot delay vessel schedules because of our dredging operation. So we have to work around those schedules. But we are looking at a much more systematic approach. We've also begun the outreach to both our agency partners, to the industry, as well as academia. We've reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I spoke with them last week, and we're going to look at trying to build a model, a sedimentation model. It'll take about a year to build that will help predict where the sediment is coming from, and if there's things that we can do in order to limit where the siltation is occurring. Okay? Quite frankly, I'd much rather keep it out in the main channel and let the federal government pay for it than us. Okay? Now, so we're looking at seeing how do we deal with it long term. We've reached out to the American Association of Port Authorities to see if they have information from other ports where they've dealt with such high siltation rates and what are they doing, as well as we're starting to reach out to the academia. Can somebody give us some guidance? Are any case studies or histories or studies, research that's been done that would provide guidance? As well as, listen, private industries having the same challenge. What are they doing? So we're trying to research to see anything we can to minimize our maintenance dredge cost. However, until then, we've got to make sure the port remains operational and we don't inhibit the flow of vessels coming in and out. So as such, Mother Nature has dealt us a curveball. We're taking a swing at it. So far, we've not hindered our operations, but it has come at a cost. It continues to require some additional dredging. As a matter of fact, your board packet got changed late Friday afternoon because Friday at noontime I received additional information. Friday, we just dredged here at Talleyrand less than 3 months ago and dredged over 70,000 yards. That's typically more than we would in an annual year. That was our second event already this fiscal year at Talleyrand. Friday, I got a new survey in at noontime. I've got to do a minimum of another 50,000 yards right now to maintain operations here at the terminal. So they're out there dredging today. So our challenge is continue to maintain our current berths and operations. So what I have before you today is one, I wanted to give you the background and information on where we're at today while we've had to do the dredging that we've had to so far. We've had to do 3 change orders internally already in order to continue to maintain it, because when I get the survey in, and we are required by the river pilots to survey every 6 months, and some of our berths we have to survey on a 3-month cycle now, And as soon as I turn that information over to the river pilots, if the siltation rate has increased and we have shallower depths, we immediately either get restricted or I have to go immediately and start dredging. So we often don't have time to wait. We have to react very quickly in order to not restrict vessel operations. So I have 3 change orders that we've had to do so far. Change order number 1 was for $2 million, and it was split up with part of it goes over to the MOL TrayPack facility and part for our terminals. Now understand, anything that we do with TrayPack, while I need approval in order to do the work, it does come back to us in the form of reimbursement on our revenue side. While we do the work, they reimburse us for the full expenses of the dredging itself. So change order number 1 was for $2 million, and you can see it was broke down part for JAXPORT facilities, part for TrayPack. Change order 2 was really to continue to address some TrayPack challenges. Change order 3 was for $933,817, and again, it was split for both of us. So those 3 alone so far to date, we've already expended $3,133,817 in additional funds over the original budgeted amount. Okay? Now, that's just to get us to where we're at today. I've got to continue to make sure I maintain things for the remainder of the fiscal year, which is another 2 months. And currently I'm projecting about another $1.9 million in needs just to maintain the dredging over the next 2 months. Quite frankly, I'd love to have more to be able to continue to keep it dredging, but I don't think we can dredge any more than that. But what we're trying to do is make sure we maintain the depths in a very systematic approach such that we do not have to continue to expend additional costs for mobilization and demobilization. But we also must make sure I maintain those depths, or else our operations guys are not going to be happy on my side of the business. So I respectfully request that the board ratify change order numbers 1, 2, and 3 in the total amount of $3,133,817, as well as request the approval of the additional $1.9 million as a contingency to cover the dredging services remaining for the remainder of the current fiscal year.
Thank you, James. You did a great job explaining bad news. Okay, do I have...
Mother Nature delivered it. I'm just having to be the messenger.
You did, I think we all quite understand it in more detail than we really needed, but thank you. It was very good.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
A discussion? Yeah, John.
Through the chair. So in the audit committee earlier, Chairman Fleming presented interesting point of conversation in terms of helping get creative and create more competition and so forth in our dredging process out here. But I'm also wondering, have we engaged the Army Corps of Engineers? And a lot of this is just developing, right? So what we're talking about now is proactively looking around the corner. How can we potentially avoid spikes in the future? But I wonder if there are in-river changes in terms of how we can make changes in the channel that create the current in a way, because for example, some of the berths we know get higher amounts of silt because of the flow of the current. Can we proactively have that conversation?
We have. I've already
Good.
began that dialogue, and that's what led to the conversation about the federal government funding, building a siltation model to see where it's coming from. This is a new technology. It's started in Australia, but it's used twice here so far, so that's why we're working now to start looking at it. Our first approach is to get it modeled up around Talleyrand, since that's our largest area of annual maintenance dredging. But that's the whole concept, to see where is it coming from, to see is there things that we can do. Is there something physically we can build underwater to see it where it pushes it further out. And again, as I told the Army Corps, I don't mind it going out into your channel and you getting to maintain it. It's okay. And so, but they recognize the fact that we have this challenge, and they are willing to work with us to try to do that. So I've started that outreach last week, as a matter of fact.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
May I ask
John?
you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
James, have we looked at doing this in-house and buying a dredge? And
We haven't yet. We will, once we get through this contract period, we will analyze to see if that's the case. The dredging is very tricky. It is very capital intense and it's extremely high amount of maintenance on the type of equipment. And one of the things that we would certainly have to look at is would we have sufficient volume to keep that dredger running all the time, because our current dredger doesn't just simply dredge for us. He also dredges at other locations as well in order to keep his cost in line. So we will certainly begin that process and take a look.
Yeah, Eric?
To sort of piggyback on James's answer to Mr. Baker, you know, James talked about possibly not having enough business, but this is one of those, when you run the model, Mr. Baker, we also have an opportunity there to start looking at private terminals if we made the capital investment. So essentially, I mean, it's our spoil site, so we actually get a little leg up on the competition when we begin to look at this exercise. We'll be bidding against the private guys. However, you know, there's a tipping fee advantage there from our standpoint when we run the numbers in. But that's something that we certainly will look at. Me and the team, we've been talking about, but we'll make sure that we have all those models side by side when the time comes.
Well, if you're spending a couple $1 million a year, I can tell you it doesn't make sense. If you're spending $10 million a year, then the numbers start making more sense. So we have to look at it historically. Okay. Okay, well, I'll ask. Oh, Mr. Palmer.
Who does the federal dredging?
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
So they have in-house dredges themselves?
No, sir. They contract out as well.
So the logistics is the major cost for dredging. So have we ever gotten a bid from their contractor?
When it goes out to bid, yes, sir. The contract is open competitively. It's not like they have a set group of contractors. It's open to others. So
it's all the same people.
It's all the same.
It's all the same
companies put in for different bids.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
There are only two companies, right? Manson and Great Lakes?
No, sir, there's multiple dredging
More than-
companies right now. Manson is the one that we have currently under contract here. The Army Corps has under contract some different ones for because they're currently doing their maintenance dredging today as well. So I specify ours is our berth maintenance dredging. That's who we have the contract with Manson. Manson does work for the Army Corps as well under their own contracts. There's Watco who does dredging. There's different dredging companies. We just happen to have the agreement in place with, from our last request for proposals, we went in negotiations with Manson because they were the apparently bidder.
No other questions? I'll ask for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. So moved. Thank you, James. Okay, Eric,
Thank you, sir.
CEO update.
Thank you. You know, with that news being delivered, I must say that the team has done a marvelous job at making sure that we haven't had any restrictions on any vessels, because those restrictions actually will cause a revenue hiccup for us. So in spite of our challenges as it pertains to the maintenance dredging, our financials continue to be strong and they continue to grow, which is an indication of the team doing a great job as it pertains to that challenge. As you all know, we received another $32 million from the federal government over the last month for Contract B. We continue to work hard at the federal level. Our lobbying team, as well as myself and our new government affairs director, we've already started for next year. And we will continue to be persistent and diligent in our quest to seek funding as we continue to dredge the harbor. Our financial team and myself, we presented our budget to the Mayor's Budget Review Committee. That's a committee that's comprised of the executives at the mayor's office level. This is something that has been reinstituted by the mayor's office. It's prior to going to the city council and presenting our budget. It's a good litmus test for us. It gives us an opportunity to know where we're strong, where we're weak, what we need to tighten up on. And I must say we did Beth and her team did a great job, Beth and Mike McClung, in doing that. One of the things we did this year as we were going into the bond market is we had indicative ratings performed here as a sort of a litmus test to see where we are financially. Again, Beth, Mike, and her team did a real good job. We were actually joined by the mayor's executive team, their finance team, and Mr. Weinstein, Joy Gravy, and Randall Barnes that participated, as well as our chairman, in that exercise. It was a great exercise for us. It gave us an opportunity to show our strength in the market. And one of the things that the rating agencies noted as a very, very strong state of where we are business-wise is that the diversification of our book of business is something that they don't see across the port market. I think the only other port that may have a diversified book of business like JAXPORT is the Port of Houston. But they were very clear in that, and as you all know, and with the talks of tariffs and things of that nature, to have a great diversification of book of business certainly allows us to go out and get the good ratings that we're able to get as we move forward to sell our bonds. We have a new council president, and Council President Aaron Bowman. As the chairman has already noted, we have Mr. Gulliford here joining us today as the council liaison, and we welcome him again. Thank you, Mr. Gulliford. We were fortunate to have a visit from Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart over the last couple of weeks. Congressman Diaz-Balart is a ranking member on the House Appropriations Committee, where our own Congressman John Rutherford has joined that committee. That would bode well for us over the next couple of years as we continue to seek funding for our harbor deepening efforts. As you all recalled, Congressman Crenshaw, former congressman, was a ranking member on the House Appropriations Committee. Now we have 2 Florida congressmen on that committee, and I think we'll see a lot of success in the future from that. Fred and I attended the ILA South Atlantic Conference that was held in South Florida in Miami. It gave us an opportunity to meet not only with our peers from the Port of Savannah, South Carolina, Wilmington, Houston, but to actually talk to our customers and our tenants about some of the things that are happening in the market, and really have a real robust chat with our union and labor as we move forward. We continue to host our quarterly tenant committee meeting, which we had last week. Those committees have turned to be very, very good for us. It's a high level of participation. We consistently have presidents of the companies show and participate, and these companies, our customers continue to tell us that we are one of few ports that do this, but it gives us an opportunity to hear their concerns where we can go back and tweak the things that we need to tweak from an operational standpoint going forward. One of the challenges in the port industry market today is the trucking. Now that the e-time logs have come out, a lot of ports are seeing a tremendous amount of backlog and trying to get through gates and point of entrance to not only drop off containers but pick them up. But this was one of the conversations that was shared with us. It gives us the opportunity to talk and discuss with our tenants and manage through those tough times, during lunch break hours and rush hour traffic. So the tenant meetings continue to be something that's very, very good for, good for us. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Nancy Rubin and her communications team. The team has won at least 3 awards over the last month through the American Association of Port Authorities. These awards symbolize, the dedication and hard work that the ladies put in on a daily basis. Unfortunately, Nancy's not here with us today. She's attending a conference and working on her professional development as we move forward. But I want to say kudos to those ladies and what they've done, Chelsea, Whitney, Amy, what they have been doing for the organization. Quite frankly, the work that they perform, if they didn't perform it, it would be something that we would have to outsource. So certainly they have saved us a tremendous amount of funding.
Do a great job.
They do. Last but not least, we are now 100% complete as far as our executive team is concerned. Kristen DeMarco, our new Chief Commercial Officer, is here with us. She's now on board. What is it, 3 weeks now, Kristen? All of 3 weeks. She literally hit the ground running. She is working on some very exciting things. I think we will hear that in September, a new book of business that will generate quite a bit of revenue coming forward here in the next couple of weeks. Kristen, I don't know if there's anything you would like to say.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I just kind of wanted to set the stage, if I could, in terms of my observations and commitment to all of you, is that as we look at our growth trajectory for JAXPORT, obviously it's recognized that we have to have a very clear and concise midterm and long-term sales and marketing plan. With that comes fundamentals that we have to get right, and that comes in the numbers. So what I would like to share with all of you is to expect from our team a very clear, I like to use the word VMS, a visual management system, or a dashboard, if you will, that will highlight in detail our movement in our various segments from tenant to BCO to liners as it relates to revenue, volumes, win ratios, and new opportunities. So please look forward to that, and I thank you all, and I'm very happy to be part of the JAXPORT team.
Welcome, we're glad you're here.
Thank you, Ben.
With that, Mr. Chairman, if there
All right, any questions for Eric? Okay, we'll move on then.
Thank you.
James, you're up again for engineering and construction update.
Okay, I got 3 projects once again to update you on. I'm going to start off back with the Talleyrand Terminal here with the sheet pile wall, and I promise you this is new pictures, okay? The top one is not. The bottom ones are brand new. I told you they look the same each time, but it's a lot of the same type of work, but these are brand new. What I will point out to you is, notice there's a building in the background? That's because we're now facing north, and we're at the very last section in Phase 3. We've begun Phase 3, which is about a 500-foot section. It is finally under construction now. That means we've completed Phase 1, which was the center portion. We've completed Phase 2 to the south. And if you notice in the bottom picture, this is the LNG trench that is located in the middle for the Crowley LNG vessel. And you notice in the top portion it's located around station 11 plus 10. That is it. And the nice thing about that is when you're looking to the south, you don't see any cranes or any type of equipment to the south. They're all to the north. So that whole section of berth is now back in full operations. But we are already started in Phase 3. And again, you can see the sheet pile wall is going in place. This is the temporary sheet pile wall at the moment, following the deck removal. So again, very active on that north end now, fully mobilized at that end and moving forward. While that is going on, we're also taking time to do under-deck repairs. This was a contract that we awarded last year. It did get off to a slow start. We've had some challenges with that, and because we have a very tight schedule between the tides, high tides and low tides. There's only a certain period of time that you can work. It's very manual, very intense work. You can see the guys actually are up under the berth, chipping with chip hammers, jackhammers, before they can remove the spalled material, get rid of that, do some work on the rebar before they finally come back and put forms around it and put concrete under it. And so you have to do all of that work whenever the tides are low, as well as when there's not a vessel there. So it is slow going. Our contractor has kind of got it down pat now. He's actually brought in 2 additional crews, so he's got 3 crews working, and now he's really starting to make some good time with it. But we are having a considerable amount of spalled areas under there that we continue to do work on. But this is all part of our overall maintenance and long-term improvements here at the.
Hey, James, is that because we didn't have proper fendering that this area got beat up, or?
No, sir. This is actually up under the berths. And this is normally it's over time you're going to have it. You do have some impact for the ships, but that's not the primary thing. You're just in a very corrosive environment with the salt water and so forth.
Yeah, I understand that, but as long as the rebar's covered, I mean, that shouldn't be an issue, and it's usually due to something hitting it. is what causes it.
It has, and there's some of it, is a lot of it because there's cracks, and we weren't actively addressing those over time, and we are now. And so we're truly taking steps now to continue to monitor those. Not only that, but we're doing routine inspections of all these underdecks as well. And finally, my last project is the one out at the Dames Point Terminal. This is the cruise terminal parking relocation. I showed you the picture at the bottom last month and showed you that the mast arms are coming up out of the ground. Well, this time around, you see a lot of black asphalt. That's brand new asphalt. We're glad to see it down. That means the work under the asphalt is done. That means all your storm systems in place, the conduits for all the communications, the power, and all of that is in place for the majority of it. We continue to have a good bit of work left to be done. One of our two key areas is at this location here, the cruise, and here we have a lot of slope protection that we're having to put in place. We're getting ready to begin that work. It continues to be a real challenge because we continue to have erosion over the last year since the plans have been done. So we continue to try to work with the contractor to get that in place, but we're still pushing to finish the project on schedule. So again, that's my final slide. It's nice to see asphalt down now and not just lime rock. So, and with that, I'm glad to take any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I just have to say, James, I've never heard asphalt sound so pretty.
He made
Glad to make it sound good.
He made dredging sound pretty, too. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
All right, Beth is going to give us a recap of our debt issues that we just completed.
Yes, thank you. I'll remind you that on June 4th, the board, we're very grateful that you all authorized us to issue up to $80 million in new debt. And we promised that $17 million and change would be used to pay down our bank line of credit, and the remainder of the money would be for JAXPORT's share of the harbor deepening, as well as the environmental cost, I'm sorry, not the environmental cost, but the infrastructure projects we had done to prepare for the deepening. So we worked with an excellent team of advisors. Hope Scarpinato is with us today from PFM. We also had our main underwriters were Bank of America Merrill Lynch and JP Morgan Chase. As part of the approval process, the board agreed that we could use either bank debt or bond financing, whichever was most advantageous to the port. So we tested the market. Our procurement team sent out an RFP for bank debt. We had 12 banks responding. The winning bid was Chase Bank with a rate of 2.872 for 15 years fixed. And we will issue that in a fully amortizing 15-year loan. The remaining amount needed would be in bond debt, and we proceeded with the help of those advisors to issue that debt, and the date for that debt issue was the 24th of July. The terms of the debt are interest only for 15 years, and then fully amortizing principal and interest years 16 through 30. We got a very good rate on the debt, which I'll talk about in just a minute, but you were previously provided by Eric Green a copy of the investor presentation and the credit rating presentation, which we gave to our rating agencies. As Eric said, we met with the rating agencies on June 24th. They came here, and we thank our chairman for participating with us in that endeavor. It was a very good meeting, and both rating agencies, after they left, when they issued their reports, they kept us at the same rate. And for Moody's, that's an A2 for the port, and for Fitch, that's an A. So that the debt rating remains the same for the new debt, and we're very happy about that. Eric mentioned one of the themes that came from the rating agencies as a part of that process, and that was they really like and give us a lot of credit for the diversification of our revenue stream, both the types of cargo we handle and our trade lanes. So that's extremely important. But there were three other areas that I would mention to you that they pay a lot of attention to. And one is they place a lot of importance on our interlocal government agreement and the revenue we receive from the city and through the city from the JEA, et cetera. They also really appreciate the long-term nature of the contracts and our minimum annual guarantees, which we strive to get in every contract. And fourth, of course, our strategic location, which you've heard about from our independent consultant as well as Eric. So our sale date was July 24th, and as that date approached, We were very excited about what the market would produce for us, and so, but this was the Wall Street Journal article that appeared that Tuesday morning when we came in to sell the bonds, and that was there'd been a huge Treasury sell-off the Friday before and the Monday before, and so rates on the long end of the yield curve had risen significantly. When we initially went into this process in early May, our advisors looking at the market then suggested that we needed to anticipate rates of 4.3 to 4.6 on the debt. We had already known that because of the bank debt, we would get the first $28 million at 2.8%. But we were concerned about what the market would do that day on the bonds. So we did have a lackluster response, but all of the bonds were sold. And at the end of the day, the all-in interest rate cost on the bonds was, let me see here. All in on the bonds was 4.164, but total blended rate for the 30-year financing is 3.874, significantly under what we had initially estimated several months before. So we were very happy with that, and again, the rating agencies left us with the same rating on the new issues. So you all authorized us to issue up to $80 million in new debt. Because of the premium we were able to get on the bonds, the total amount of new debt on the balance sheet is $71,382,000, less what we'll pay off on the line of credit. So the good news is that we can put this money to work right away, paying off the line of credit, and then having the money available to provide to the Army Corps of Engineers for Contract B, Phase 1. Any questions?
Questions for Beth? No? Thank you, Beth. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike McClellan will now give us a financial update.
Good morning. We have before us financials through June 30th, 9 months into the year. Just looking at revenues, again, strong numbers on the revenue side. We're seeing 10% growth budget comparison, and then about 15% year over year. So that's a quick snapshot. Next slide, please. The containers. We track very closely our TEUs, of course, and you can see we're headed towards another record year in TEUs, and we're also touting some strong Asian numbers, 308,000 TEUs 9 months to date compared to 276,000 a year ago, 12% growth in the Asian market as well. So strong performance out of our container revenue line item. On to autos. Autos, a nice match here, 3% growth in units as well as 3% growth in dollars year-to-date budget variance. And year over year, not as strong in terms of the volume, but last year was aided by some short-term revenues of what we call point of rest business at the Thames Point terminal. But a very healthy year in autos, and that's affecting all the markets. Toyota's having a good year. Our POV market is also, we're moving a lot of volumes there as well. Next slide, please. Looking at the expense side of the ledger, we're now at 152 full complement of full-time equivalents versus a budget of 155. So we're showing some savings there on the salaries and benefits line item. And unfortunately, in bold, dredging is 4.7 year to date. We're seeing that land around $6.7 million. So our expenses are going to be impacted, obviously, adversely with that high dredging number, and we'll have to plan accordingly. And going into next year, we have 225,000 cubic yards in our budget. We're hoping that these numbers will subside, but as James mentioned, we're working on that. Next slide. This is the full income statement, again, highlighting revenues, expenses. We also have some savings in our non-operating line item, namely debt service. We think that we're still going to have a strong year as the revenues are going to outpace even the high dredging costs we have this year. We think we're going to be able to add to our net bottom line. What's $3.2 million here will be a little shy of $2 million, even with the additional dredging, which we'll be able to carry over to next year's capital improvement program. Next slide, and to show that, we can see our cash balances currently at $17 million. Our target is around $16 million, which is half a year of our operating expenses. That's what the rating agencies have prescribed. We think that number will land closer to $18 million by the end of the year. Again, that was reflecting the monies that we'll put aside for next year's capital improvement program. The next slide, please. Liabilities, you see the line of credit, which will be paying down $17 million in the next several days. Any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Good news. I mean, to be positive after all that additional dredging is great. Yeah. Any questions? Thank you. Mike. Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. John Phillips, who's with the General Counsel's office, to come up and speak to the board about board governance. Welcome, John.
I was asked to talk about board and governance mainly in terms of public records and sunshine law, and to touch on, the basics of board governance. I think y'all are undoubtedly all familiar with the charter and
can you speak up a little, John?
Bylaws.
Yeah.
Sure.
Microphone. Thanks.
Sorry, I thought my voice was on the microphone, so I will talk louder. I know we have a couple new board members, and so my apologies to Councilman Gulliford, who's heard this at least 1 million times, I'm sure.
Can I leave now, John?
Yes, sir. I was just going to recommend, if y'all do have any questions about sunshine and public records, you could always ask Councilman Gulliford, because I'm sure he's an expert on it. And, of course, you also have Linda Williams, who's an ethics expert and an expert on all these other issues. And we also have a lawyer here at Gil Feltel who, y'all can bring those people in. And then if necessary, you now have my card. Or if you just feel like calling me, please feel free to call me anytime. I'll be happy to help or get somebody to help you if I can't do it myself. Now, on sunshine law, these meetings, of course, are all public meetings, and that's required by law, as I'm sure you know. And that means there has to be advance written notice, and there has to be minutes taken, and there has to be the meeting has to be held in a place where the public can go. So, you can't have a public meeting at a gated community, for example, unless the guard is instructed to let everyone in, which would sort of defeat the purpose of a gated community, I imagine. And you can't move the whole board and have a meeting at a hotel on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, even though the weather there is much better now than it is here. Under normal circumstances, I would talk about the mechanics of the written minutes and the notices, but y'all don't really have to worry about that because the staff here will take care of all of that for you. The only exception to that would be if you were to decide to have a special meeting. For instance, if one of you wanted to talk to, say, Dr. Newman, privately, of course, you can't do that about board business. But if you want to talk to Dr. Newman about public business, you could do a notice as long as it's 24 hours in advance at least, and you could have a meeting where you could have a semi-private discussion. If no one showed up, you could have a private discussion. But you would still have to take minutes of what was discussed, and those minutes would have to be publicly available. So there's really no such thing under the Sunshine Law as a private discussion about board business amongst yourselves. Now, what's the easiest way to violate the Sunshine Law? There are three. The three easiest ways are, first, the after the meeting discussion. Let's continue the debate. Let's talk about what we just did. Let's talk about what we're going to do next time in terms of substantive issues. You cannot do that legally. If you do it on purpose, it's a crime. Another way to do the second easiest way to do it is to text another board member about board business that you're going to vote on in the future. That is also a violation of the Sunshine Law, and if you don't preserve the text, it's also a public records violation. And the third easiest way is to email each other about board business. You're not really allowed to do that with a very limited exception. There is an exception in the law which says you can do a public statement of position as long as you're not soliciting replies. So now, of course, you're creating the opportunity for one of your board members to forget that he or she can't reply to that without violating the Sunshine Law. So it's not something that I would recommend doing. And there's also a prudential reason not to do it, which is that once you do that, you're sort of locked in. And then, what if you find something out later that causes you to want to change your mind, and then somebody's going to take that email, if they ever get it, and accuse you of being a flip-flopper. But the main reason not to do it is because it's not legal to do so. Now, you can talk with each other about things that are not related to board business. You could have lunch. You could talk about whether Leonard Fournette is going to average 4 yards a carry, or or politics, or in general, or anything else that isn't board related. But of course, you have to also take into account that you may be creating a perception that you're violating the law, even if you're not. And of course, perception can be reality for some people, especially now in the age of cynicism. So now, does that mean you can't talk to the CEO privately? No, it doesn't. You can talk to anybody who works at JAXPORT, from the CEO on down, privately about anything you want to talk about, as long as there's not another board member within earshot. And the only danger there is you cannot use a staff member or the CEO to act as a liaison. You can't say, Eric, please go tell my fellow board member that he needs to vote this way. You can't do that. You can issue reports. As I said, you can do a statement of position, but there's good reason not to do that if you don't think, unless it's absolutely necessary. So basically, anything in writing or oral that invites a response about board business is potentially will be thought to be a Sunshine Law violation, even if it was innocently sent. And by the way, this includes, there's no let's go to the bathroom together exception to the Sunshine Law. Now, the penalties, as I mentioned, are pretty stiff, but ideally, it won't really matter what the penalties are because nobody's going to violate the law. Public records. The main thing there is virtually anything, not everything, but virtually anything you write is going to be a public record if it relates to board business. So documents, maps, books, tapes, videos, you didn't even have to write it yourself. If you just have it, because you got it from somebody else. If it's in the course of transacting official business, that's likely a public record. This would include drafts that are circulated for review. If you circulate a draft amongst staff for comments. The comments are going to be a public record. The only good exceptions to that are if you're taking personal notes for your own use only to help you remember something, that's not a public record. If you are having emails or texts that are personal, completely personal, not a public record. You can also text about scheduling. You know, you could say, anybody mind if we have the meeting a half hour later? That sort of thing. That's not the kind of document that the agency needs to save, but almost everything else is going to be a public record, especially if it's in writing. If you give notes to your assistant for dictation, that's technically not a public record either, but I wouldn't want to push that if I were you. Because you can always be accused of a public record. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, you know, nowadays you can get sued for doing nothing, or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, not every single lawsuit that ever filed is meritorious, and many of them, and I've worked for the city now for 16 years, and I can tell you many of the lawsuits that are filed against us are completely frivolous. I mean, not all, but the possibility exists that you could get sued even if you haven't done anything wrong. If that happens, we will defend you. So with respect to board governance, you know, here's how you can stay in the lane very easily by not violating the Sunshine Law. And, you know, the charter sets up the management of the organization with the CEO, and the board sets policy, basically. So, you know, as long as you're not, you know, going to the CEO and demanding that somebody gets fired because you want your nephew hired. I mean, none of you are going to do that, but that's the kind of thing that can get you in trouble. You follow these rules, you should be okay. If you have any questions about whether or not you can do something, by all means call Linda or Gil or me or somebody, and we'll take care of it. We'll answer the question for you. I was told 10 minutes, and I think I've made it. So anybody have any questions?
Questions? No, thanks for that refresher. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, at this point, I'll ask for a motion to approve travel for any members of the board to do business in the month of August.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No other business? Then we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.